Here are 13 brutally honest things you need to know before moving to Australia. Everybody talks about sunshine, beaches, and how beautiful they are, but what's the reality actually like about moving to Australia? Hi, my name's Annie and I've lived in Australia since 2011 and I'm here to tell you exactly what it's like living in Australia. If you didn't know, I run londonandsydney.com, which is one of Australia's top travel sites covering lots and lots of different places around the country to go and visit. I've been fortunate enough to see all of Australia and it is honestly amazing. But there are some things that you do really need to know before moving here. This list is very, very honest and it's very subjective as well. So please don't come at me in the comments about your opinion. I'm just purely sharing what I've experienced since moving to Australia 14 years ago. Number one, probably one of the major things that expats and migrants struggle with when moving to Australia is actually making friends. I have to say it is very, very true. And I've come up with a theory in terms of why this is. People don't tend to move away from home because the country is so huge. Found with a lot of Australians, they have a very good core group of friends, which are all their sort of primary school friends that they've grown up with, and they don't really feel like they need to make more friends. One thing I have noticed though is if Australians have travelled to other countries, then they're much more open to making friends with other migrants. What I've also noticed as well is British banter doesn't always travel. I think a lot of people assume that English people and Australians are very similar, but actually they're not at all. The sense of humour is very, very different when it comes to making jokes, having a dry sense of humour, and I've had to really tone it down over the years because a lot of people don't get it. And especially if you go out, especially Sydney nightlife, the bouncers do not get sense of humour. So I've been thrown out so many bars before by making jokes that just did not travel at all. One thing I will say about Australians is that they are very friendly. They will help you out like there's no tomorrow. Like they will go above and beyond to help you if you're in a situation. I've had situations where my car broke down in the middle of nowhere and the amount of people that stopped to help me, they're super, super helpful. But I think in terms of trying to integrate with Australians, say for example, you're on a night out as you would be in England. I have made so many random friends with people in the pubs in England on a night out, whereas in Australia, you wouldn't do that. People are very segregated and they're very separate in the way that they integrate with their social lives, for example. Moving on to point two. So what I found is that the lifestyle in Australia is a lot calmer to what you think. People don't really drink in Australia. I know that sounds weird. Like people will have maybe a couple of drinks, but they don't go out and go crazy like they would do in England, for example. This means that you'll find a lot of places will close early in Australia, such as cafes tend to close really early, around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is very hard to get your head around. And then also at night time, you'll see most places are pretty dead. Even Sydney is pretty dead at night time, just because people don't really go out. But what you will find with that is that everybody gets up very early. I'm sure you've seen viral posts all on Instagram about how Bondi Beach is just packed in the morning, full of people going for runs and yoga and everything else on the beach. And that's basically what the lifestyle looks like here. The mornings are spectacular. And if you're not a morning person, you more than likely will become a morning person when you move here. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one, but one thing I have noticed since moving to Australia 14 years ago, I have lived in Sydney, I've lived in a lot of places all up and down the East Coast, and I'm currently based in Sunshine Coast hinterland now. But one thing I have noticed, especially traveling around the whole country, is unless you're from Sydney, most Australians don't really like Sydney-siders. And I think this just comes down to being a big city, and it's probably quite similar to how a lot of people feel about Londoners in England. Okay, point 4. The guilt of moving away from home will never ever leave you. No matter how much you think you'll get over it, you won't. If you've got aging parents, it's constantly going to be on your mind about whether you should move back sometime to look after them and what you should actually do. One thing I have noticed when I do go back to visit friends and family in England is I do feel very guilty for living in Australia. I found that a lot of English people do tend to feel like they are always worse off. That is just my opinion. But it's always like, you've got it better than us, you live in Australia. And it makes me feel very guilty. But also at the same time, I kind of always feel like, where do I belong? Do I belong in Australia? Do I belong in England? And I find that sometimes I don't feel like I really belong in either. And that is quite a hard thing to get your head around. Now, fortunately, I found my place where I absolutely love living, and I definitely feel like Australia is now my home. But it has taken me 14 years to get to this point where I definitely feel more Australian now than English. This is something I will cover in a whole nother video review, so please like and subscribe and you will get more updates coming very soon. One thing I do love about Australia more than anything, and we're going to point 5 now, is that Australia feels so safe in comparison to the UK. I went back to the UK twice last year and I was terrified in London that I was going to get my phone stolen, I was going to get mugged. I was not feeling safe at all, not just in London but in other places around the UK as well, especially walking by myself at night time. In Australia, I never ever feel unsafe here at all. When I've been on recent work trips to Sydney, I automatically thought I can't get my phone out because someone will steal it, especially if I was by the curb. And then I realised, oh, I'm in Australia, it's fine, nothing like that's going to happen, and it hasn't. Number 6, work-life balance isn't quite what you might think it is in Australia. Now, I'm sure you've seen people say, oh, I've gone for a surf after work, gone to the beach before and after work. And that sounds amazing. And it really is. And there's no reason why you can't do that. But I have found personally, and I've had a lot of jobs in Australia, I've worked way longer hours here than I ever did in England. To the point where in my last job, I was working every single weekend, every single day from morning to evening. And it was very full on. This has happened in multiple jobs for me in Australia. Obviously, this is subjective. That's just the experience I've had. So don't think that it's always going to be like you're going to be on holiday when living here. Unless you're on a really good wage, living by the beach is probably not going to happen. And that moves me into point number 7. The pay cannot be as great as what you might think it will be. Now, people in Australia do tend to get paid more than what they do in England, but what I have found personally is even in the last 7-8 years, my pay hasn't really gone up, especially when you start thinking about the cost of living. Personally, if I was at an age where I wanted to really progress in my career, I probably wouldn't move to Australia. I would stay in London personally, because that is where you're going to find more major global companies to work for and a lot more positions there. In Australia, the job market is much, much smaller and you won't find as many global companies to work for. Number 8. As I just said, cost of living is pretty hard in Australia. I know it's hard everywhere at the moment, but the cost of living crisis in Australia is more than real. What that looks like, which you might not see in the city so much, but in more the regional places around Australia, you'll see a lot of the smaller towns have changed significantly since COVID. And you'll now see those locals have been forced out of their homes and they're now living in tents in showgrounds, caravan parks. You see it everywhere across the country. One thing the government have done is that they have built these really unsustainable housing estates where the houses are all jammed in next to each other, where there's very little space between each houses. There's no trees around them at all. I have heard that you can literally hear people next door to your house even going to the toilet. Like, they are very unsustainable housing. You need to be careful of this and not get sucked into thinking that you're getting a really good deal on a house, because they have been created to try and fix the housing crisis, but they've been done in a very, very cheap way. Number 9, one thing that actually really bothers me in Australia is there's so many rules. Like, there are so many rules, it's ridiculous. I didn't realise it for quite a long time until probably recently, when I just went, hang on a minute, like, there are rules for everything here. To the point where you have to park your car in a certain direction on the street. You'll have so many rules around alcohol here, which I think is the reason why probably a lot of people don't really drink anymore, because the laws around drinking are so huge. I went to see Oasis recently in Sydney, and the rules around drinking there were crazy. If you bought any drinks, they were all in cans. They had to open all the cans before you could leave the counter. You couldn't go up to a counter with a drink in your hand and order more drinks. It's just so crazy how they make up these really strange rules, and somehow you just have to accept it. Number 10. Now, you might not have heard this before, but there is a very strong essence of a tall poppy syndrome in Australia. I didn't even really know what that was until I moved here, but it's basically when people think they're above everybody else. First of all, you won't really see news about any other country in Australia unless there's an Australian involved. And within that as well, there is definitely a class divide. Like, you'll see backpackers will get treated pretty badly over here. I've had tradies that have contacted me to say that when they work in wealthy people's houses, they get treated really badly. When I first came to Australia as a backpacker and I went to go to Icebergs, the famous outside pool in Bondi, and I went to go there to sit in a restaurant and have a meal. I always wanted to do that, and I turned up and the guy in the restaurant looked at me and said, "You'd be suited better to go downstairs to the cafe." I was like, wow, okay. I mean, fair enough, I wasn't really dressed for it, but to be told that, I was pretty shocked at the time. Okay, number 11. One thing I have always noticed in Australia is that kids are really, really nice and respectful, and they know how to talk to adults as well. Like, I've had some really good conversations with random children, like whether I'm in the supermarket chatting to a 15-year-old working behind the till. I have never felt intimidated by kids in Australia. I've even sat on trains full of kids all going to school when I'm going to work, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, should I move to another carriage? As I probably would have done if I was in England. But in general, I think children are really, really nice in Australia. Number 12. Christmas in Australia will never, ever, ever, ever feel normal if you're not from the Southern Hemisphere. First, you'll think it's really fun, having Christmas in the sun, or putting a Santa hat on in a bikini, and that will probably last maybe about 2 years. After that, it just becomes weird, and it never, ever feels like Christmas here. I have never got my head around it, and last year I went back for Christmas for the first time to England, and it was so nice just to be able to appreciate all the lovely Christmas feels and just how much effort everybody goes to. I feel like there's not that much effort made around Christmas here in Australia. And lastly, number 13, if there's one thing you need to do when you move to Australia is embrace it. Like, embrace the outdoors, because the outdoors is what Australia does magnificently well. And what I'm talking about here is not just going to the beach, to your local beach. I'm talking about go out and explore. Before I moved here, I was very much party girl in London. I was living it up, just going out all the time. I'd never done a hike in my life, or was even interested in wild swimming, or even really in the beach. Like, it just, the outdoors thing didn't even appeal to me. And then when I moved to Australia and I started going on hikes, it just blew my mind. And the more I've travelled around Australia, the more I've seen how unbelievable it is. Like, it will literally make you feel like you've gone to Jurassic Park, and you'll be going, oh my gosh, how does all this exist? Like, it is unbelievable. You have to go to it. So if you are prepared to understand that your lifestyle will probably change quite a lot, but for the better and for your health and wellness, then Australia is definitely a country for you. Let us know what your experience is like in the comments. We love reading all the comments and respond to all of you. And hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more honest and real videos about living in Australia.